Hi, Basket Case here. I'm going to demonstrate starting a longleaf pine needle basket on a wood disc. This has pre-drilled holes, and one of the holes has a circle around it and the rest of them don't. I'm going to make that my starting point just to have a reference for you. This one we're going to make a basket, and we're going to use the spiral stitch and then start shaping the basket. We'll learn some new stitches. This looks like 2 rows with the wrap and the bead, but it's actually one. You wrap and then you attach a bead, you wrap and you attach a bead, and that's called Mariposa. This is called popcorn, and we're building on what we've learned below. This is actually spiral stitching to the left and then wrapping 2. When you get to the end of the row, you spiral stitch back to the right, and it makes what's called the popcorn stitch. I have about 1.5 yards of yellow waxed leather thread. I'm going to come from back to front. I go through that circle as my first stitch, and I'm going to stitch to the left. I will be leaving a 4 to 6 inch tail, and when I make my first 2 stitches, they're going to be loops so that I can add my pine needles and start my row. I want to stitch over this tail so that I secure it as I go along. There's my first loop to the left, and I want my loops to be about 1.5 inches, 2 inches tall. You'll see that I've trapped that tail underneath there. I'm going to go to the left again to the next empty hole. Now that I have those loops, I'm going to set this down, and I call this the bunny ears. I have 2 loops. I start with, on this particular disc, 5 pine needles, and I take the cut end and I put them through those loops with the cut end coming out on the right side about 2 inches. To snug these down, I want to press down on the pine needles and that tail. I want to press down on the disc, and this is my working end of this thread, the one that's attached to the needle. And I'm going to slowly snug those down. Once I have these first 2 stitches, I want to make sure that I keep tension on my thread at all times. I'm going to snug this tail, and this is what I call the vice grip. I'm pinning it down in the back, and I'm pinning it down in the front. The way that I hold the basket when I'm working, I'm holding it here, but my hand position, you'll notice the back of my hand is under the pine needles. It's very natural to try and hold them down and stitch around. You don't need to do that. The thread, as it goes around, will press the pine needles where it needs to be. I start with 5 pine needles, and I start building up and adding pine needles slowly. The reason I do that is if I have the full row here, when I start to put row 2 on and I trim these, I have to go over a big bump, and it really doesn't look that nice. You'll see that these rows blend together nicely because I tapered it thicker to build up the row. Generally, I want to be at my thickness by about row 2. Then I'll put this row guide on. It's a cut piece of a drinking straw. And when I have that on, it helps me keep the rows all the same size, which makes my stitches the same size. So now I'm pinning it down in the back, and again, I want to continue stitching around that tail to secure it. I'm going to the next hole in the left. I go in on the back. I come out on the front. And to make a flat base to my basket, see, I'm snugging that tail again, and I'm gently pulling this stitch across the top of the disc toward my belly. To make a flat base, if on the first row or 2, in between each stitch you press that down, it keeps it flat so you don't have a wobbly basket. I'm going to do the top half of my stitch, which is going around to the back. Then I'm going to go to the next hole in the left. That's the bottom half of the stitch. That won't matter now, but when you're changing threads, the top half and the bottom half of the stitch will matter. Again, I'm snugging this down, and then I'm holding it secure. I have 4 stitches, and I'm going to start adding pine needles. Before I do that, this tail is still a little bit loose, so I'm going to use my pliers and really pull that snug. When I add a pine needle, I first do the top half of my stitch. I'm holding it down in the back. That tail's pretty secure now. And I'm going to take the cut end of the pine needle goes into the basket. It's very natural to hold it back here, but your aim won't be very accurate, and they'll start to break. If your needle breaks while you're trying to put it in, trim off the broken part and use the rest of the needle. I hold it a 1/2 inch from the end. I spread these needles apart and I slide it in between there. And when I feel it catch, I've already got the top of that stitch. So I go over to the next hole. I do the bottom half going into the next hole to the left. And you'll see I'm holding this here until it pops out from under my fingers, and that stays pretty secure. I'm pressing the whole thing and pulling the thread across the top of my disc. You'll see that the tail is still under every one of those stitches. If you do happen to miss one of the stitches on the tail, you don't necessarily have to go back and pull those out as long as you get it back under there and secure it. Now I usually do about 2 stitches and then add another pine needle. So here's my second one. And again, I've gone over the top to the back. I'm holding my pine needle about a 1/2 inch from the cut end and spreading those needles apart and sliding it in there. I feel it catch. And I go to the next hole, go in the back, and come out the front. Set my disc down to press this nice and flat. And I'm going to go over the top again. I'm going to put my clip on here. Whenever I set down my work or let go of my stitch, I use this little, it's a sewing clip. And I'm going to pull in the tail again to really snug that down. Now it's pretty secure. This stitch is rather snug. And I'm going to continue stitching around. I'm going to add a pine needle about every other stitch, but I'm going to stop 4 holes before I get to the end here, before I get to where I started. Because when I come back, I'm going to show you how to trim these needles and sew over them and start row 2. Okay, see ya.